Hello, my name is Brock Stanton. I am an expiring meteorologist, and we are going to be looking at several days of upcoming severe weather, including just a brief look at the severe weather that's about to start in Florida. So we're going to start with that first, and we're going to see tornado probabilities very low, some scattered damaging winds, and maybe some isolated to scattered instances of large hail, especially on the eastern coast of Florida. And since this event is so imminent, we're actually going to look at some surface analysis of what the Storm Prediction Center is already, like the surface observations from the Storm Prediction Center. So this is our mixed weather cape, and we can already see we have values over 1,000, which is favorable for severe weather, and our surface-based cape values are well over 2,000, even over 3,000, which is, again, favorable for severe weather. Our low-level shear is not favorable whatsoever for severe weather. Let's go to SRH values. Again, you want these over 200. For the most part, they're not even over 50, and those values over the Gulf of Mexico, that they're not going to reach it to the shoreline in order to provide any sort of very notable tornado threat. However, the bulk shear is generally 30 to 40 knots, which could provide an isolated instance of could provide some just enough wind shear for supercell thunderstorms, which, given the strong thermodynamic environment, could prove supportive for damaging winds and hail. So that's the surface observations, and actually the Storm Prediction Center, because of this, has issued a mesoscale discussion indicating that there is a 60% chance of a severe thunderstorm watch for areas in and around this highlighted area. And again, we're just going to take a really quick look at what the high-res models are showing now. So we have to switch over. We'll go over to the HRRR. We're really not even going to look at the environment too much in this because the environment's unfolding right now. We're just going to look and see where it shows the storms developing. And we can see that the storms develop here, again, right along the east coast of Florida. That's where I personally think the greatest risk of severe weather is, but you can again see this line of storms, especially earlier on up here, works its way in, providing the chance for damaging winds and large hail, and again, maybe a brief weak tornado, but that threat is highly conditional upon localized areas of shear developing along like sea breeze fronts and convergence zones. And again, we're just going to take a really brief look at the NAM 3K, and we're going to see these storms develop, these supercell storms develop, capable of mostly damaging winds and hail again. Like I said, you can already show you how the instability is already developing for strong to severe storms, so I don't want to be too redundant and look at that. But what we're now going to look at next is our day 2 risk here, where they issued a slight risk for parts of northern Texas and southwest Oklahoma, as well as a fairly broad marginal risk. So that's what we're talking about next. But just to show you what we'll be covering in the rest of the video, we can see there's this very broad slight risk for severe weather that includes all hazards possible, damaging winds and hail being the main threat, but isolated tornadoes do appear possible with this. Again, we'll get more into that later. And then a day 4, 5, and now a new day 6 risk as well. We will try to get through this quickly, but we have a lot to unpack and we want to be detailed, so this might end up being a longer video. So we're going to start out with the HRRR again. We're going to go to the south central United States. And again, we're just going to look at the storm coverage at first. And we're going to see storms are going to develop into the evening and overnight hours. So this is getting into the evening. We can see these storms develop down here. This is like a more conditional risk because it's going to be hard to get storms to develop along the dry line because of warm air aloft. And then these storms are going to develop here and model vary significantly with the amount of storm coverage, especially with northern extent. But we can see this is in the slight risk area, and we're just going to take a sounding here out ahead of these storms. And it says none because there's a very weak cape, though I do think at least an isolated severe threat will develop. You can see here this model is less aggressive. The NAM3K is more aggressive with storm coverage and instability, and we'll show you that later. So we're just going to look at the mixed layer cape quickly, and we're going to see that it tries to surge in, but it's on this run, it's a very narrow axis and isn't as co-located with the storm coverage. If storms were able to develop a little earlier, you could see there is an environment that's somewhat favorable for severe weather, but we can see that capping inversion right there is delaying the development of those storms. And I'm just gonna, again, we have to be quick. The low-level shear environment is basically completely unsupportive of tornadoes, so I'm not even going to bother showing the low-level shear for this setup because, again, after this we still have 4 more days of severe weather that we will be trying to cover, so we have a lot we have to try and get into. We can see how the shear arrives. That is going to be favorable. We could see some storms with rotating updrafts, which again are supercells, but the low-level shear is just not there for a tornado threat. Let's see. So let's look at the lapse rates, and we're just going to see if there's going to be lapse rates favorable for hail. And we're going to see that there is as we get into the evening hours. So definitely damaging winds and hail will be possible. See all these yellows and even oranges showing up in the area that we're seeing storms, so that indicates that large hail will definitely be possible, especially with isolated storms. And again, that goes all the way through this entire area, but it's just outside of this area, we're not really sure how substantial storm coverage will be, and that's why other areas probably don't have higher categorical outlooks. This area in here is where there's the highest confidence to storm coverage. So, let's see, is there anything else we want to look at in here? Again, we're just going to show the significant tornado parameter. It's very quick. It's non-existent. It's not there. Say photographs very quickly again to show the lack of a tornado threat. You can see the lines are pretty straight, and yeah, so I don't think we'll be seeing much of a tornado threat with this. But we are now going to switch over to the NAM3K, and we're going to start out, and you're going to notice a big difference when we look at storm coverage here. We look and we're going to see how those storms really initiate along the cold front. And notice how much earlier initiation is too, and that's because we're going to take a sounding. And you're going to see there's no warm air aloft, so that's allowing these storms to develop much sooner. And temperatures are cooling rapidly aloft, and there's no little inversion. Like, if we were to take a sounding from a couple hours earlier, I bet we would see one. Let's try right here. Again there, so you can see, that's not a huge inversion, that would be overcome. That could be overcome, and it is, we see later on as it erodes away, but that right there, what I'm talking about, that's called a capping inversion. And again, we see these storms rapidly develop, and something I do want to say is that the NAM3K generally has a bias to go linear. HRR generally shows more supercells. So again, just keep that in mind when I show you the reflectivity outputs from these models. But again, I'll generally try and give which one I think is more likely based off of this. And again, there's some initially favorable environment for supercells, so the fact we see supercells early on does make sense. And then, again, we could maybe see some upscale growth eventually. We'll just have to watch that with time and see if that does end up happening. And again, large hail would be possible with these storms. Let's just check out the environment. Severe weather. Environment definitely supportive of severe weather, though not a widespread type of event. Let's look at the Cape at like a broader scale compared to just that specific area. It's easier to visualize it like this. You can see how the instability arrives much sooner on this, because remember the instability was not arriving until like the evening and overnight hours on the HRR, but this is around peak heating, and you can see how the instability spreads further north. combination of better surface heating and moisture return is probably leading to that, which is resulting in that capping inversion breaking, and we get storms all the way up here and down. So we'll just have to watch and see how that evolves. We're just going to look at a blend of the Cape and shear, and we can see how, again, this is like the greatest area of greatest concentration of that, which is why we have that slight risk, and I'll show you that it is for wind and hail. Tornadoes less than 2% wind right there, hail right there. So hail actually has the highest coverage of the areas right where storms initiate. And we're going to look at the shear aloft. We can see how it does come in. We get generally, took it away, like 40 knots, 40 to 50 knots of shear. Again, that will help organize those supercell thunderstorms, at least initially, for damaging winds and large hail. And we'll take a look at the Supercell Composite. This tries to tell you what the chances are of a supercell, assuming a storm develops in the environment. But again, these composite indices are not perfect, but you can see this area that has a greater convergence of it. So now we are going to move on to our day 3 risk, which just for a reminder where that is. It's a very broad area. Storms will probably initiate in this area and move eastward overnight and into the early morning hours of Monday. And then that will continue eastward, and we'll get to that risk later. But let's focus on day 3 now. We're going to look, and this is the NAM. It's basically a lower res version of the NAM 3K. We're just going to take a look at the Cape, and we're going to see this is the Sunday event, and then we're getting into Monday now. So they're around peak heating, and we can see these storms this is the instability. You can see how the instability is favorable for severe weather. You want these values over 1,000. You can see we have a decent quarter of that, and we're going to look and we're going to try and see where the fronts are that might serve to initiate these thunderstorms. So I like to look at the dew points for that, and it's also good to assess the moisture return for it. And we're going to see that when we get into the afternoon, you can see our cold fronts up here, our dry lines down here. So our greatest area of convergence to get thunderstorm initiation is probably going to be northern Texas, maybe southern Oklahoma. But really, anywhere along these boundaries as we go, it does have a chance to initiate the storms. And we're just going to quickly check and see if there is a capping inversion overall, like how that develops. So we're just going to look and see where we want to go. Surface-based CIN. We look to see for the capping inversion, just overall Monday. You can see in the morning how there is that, and then it begins to erode. But we can still see at peak heating how there is still some there, which might make it harder for storms to initiate. But then when we start to get into the evening hours, that erodes more. So this is really when I would be pretty confident we have storms ongoing, surface-based storms. So we're going to check that and just see if that is how it pans out. I'm going to get back out. You can see the storms get ongoing here. They go, and we could see some storm development down here. That would not surprise me whatsoever. And actually the NAM 3K does go 60 hours out, so we are going to take a quick peek at it and just see what it tries to do with storm coverage. We can see they break through the cap a little bit. And you can see right in that area that I highlighted had the greatest forcing. That's where thunderstorms developed. We're just going to try and check and see if these storms are in what type of environment these storms are moving into. So again, the storms might be elevated because there's a lot of capping left. You can see that those values down there, that warm air aloft. So those storms might be elevated, but even elevated storms can bring an instance of large hail and isolated damaging winds. And these storms will eventually become surface-based, will likely eventually become surface-based, so we're just going to have to watch that develop. And we're just going to show, still on the NAM 3K, EHI, which is a blend of shear and instability for storms, and we can see how it develops, especially down here as storms may eventually develop along the cold front and dry line and reach this environment down here, though we have to look back at the regular NAM to see that far. And again, I know storms aren't showing initiation along the dry line. Would not surprise me if you get at least isolated storms along there, but it's just going to come down to how much of that capping inversion can get eroded by daytime heating. And that's something that can be very difficult to predict. You can see overnight these storms move into a pretty good environment. It's a little bit of a, you can see how there's very little inhibition left. And now we can see some curving of the photographs to show tornado threat. So we're going to look and see how the upper air favors the tornado environment. And we're going to see, again, not really much of a tornado threat if storms were to develop right now, because there's no real low-level wind shear. As we get into the overnight hours, a little bit of it develops, but really we're going to have to wait till this gets into the overnight hours. So I have a feeling that if a tornado threat does end up developing, which it likely will, it would be an overnight threat. You can look into here, the overnight hours, and there's some convective inhibition still here, so it's hard to know if the storms would really be able to punch through that and become surface-based, but if they do, you do have some favorable low-level shear. Directional shear, not the greatest, and photograph isn't great, but you can see the storm relative helicity values down there, which might be easier for me to show you with this. Let's see. The tornado threat really ramps up into the overnight hours. Again, still fairly isolated, but I do think the tornado threat, unfortunately, even if it is isolated, would be taking place overnight, which isn't great to see. Because nighttime tornadoes are a lot more dangerous because you just don't see them. People might be sleeping. So, again, we'll have another video on this tomorrow, and we'll really be able to pin down the finer details of it, exactly where that nocturnal threat of isolated tornadoes will develop. But again, we can see these lapse rates, they're favorable for hail. So, supercell thunderstorms, again, would be capable of large hail, damaging winds, and perhaps an isolated tornado if they can stay discrete into the overnight hours, but it would not surprise me as the cold front catches up to these if we transition into more of a line of storms, which would keep a threat of damaging winds and tornadoes. You can see that goes into the next day. And storms aren't showing too much coverage over here. Again, I do think storms are going to try and break through that cap, and we will see some storms development further south. Again, the Storm Prediction Center tends to think that too. So we'll just have to watch and see tomorrow when those high-res models come into view, if they try and do that, or if the capping inversion and not if the combination of a cap and perhaps not strong enough forcing delay initiation or have it be further north. We're going to take a really quick look at this on the GF, or actually we'll look at it on the Euro. Quick look at it. I think the NAM is the best model at this range, but we still want to take other models into account. And if you recall yesterday, the instability was basically all down here. Now if we look on this run, Monday, it does spread it further, a little bit further north. So that is worthy to note that the Euro has trended with more instability for this day. So the instability, since the instability has trended north, the severe threat on the Euro did trend up a little bit. And we're just going to really just looking through, see where the storms are on this, just to try and see if any model is trying to show that further south initiation. And this one has it's a bit further south, you can see that that line of storms does end up developing. And this will race eastward, and again, I could see a nocturnal tornado threat developing. We're just going to check and see what the soundings are like. And there's some good directional shear, but that inhibition, you can see the values there, and going up like that, that does lead to some uncertainty with the tornado threat, because at the end of the day, you can have an okay shear profile for tornadoes, but just really not have any chance if storms don't become surface-based. And we're just going to have to watch and see that with tomorrow, because storms could stay, like the base of storms could be too high up, and as such, the cloud, like the vortex of a tornado, could not stretch far enough down to the ground to get it to become a tornado, and it would just not. You just don't get a tornado threat if this, and you just don't get a tornado threat if storms can't reach that funnel cloud down to the ground and become a tornado. And see the photographs there, again, they're pretty straight, but there is some upper level winds aloft that could favor that tornado threat if you get surface-based storms. Again, you can see it developing into the overnight hours, early morning hours, so it makes me think, maybe a damaging wind and hail threat here, transitioning to more of a wind and hail threat over, not wind and tornado threat, still perhaps some isolated instances of large hail, but really more damaging wind, isolated tornado threat as we shift into the overnight and early morning hours. And so now we're going to go look at the GFS, and we're going to transition over to the day 4 risk now. Again, this is a lot we're trying to cover here, so hopefully I'm not rushing it too much and you're able to try and catch some stuff that I'm saying. Actually, no, we just look and see where the storms develop first, because with this event, it's like, I'll tell you what they're showing. It's like a narrow plume of instability out here, and then like a larger plume of instability here, but there's just no storms for it. So that doesn't really matter. So I don't want to kind of like be confusing and misleading like that. So let's see. These are the storms that develop overnight and into the morning hours. You can see into the morning hours they redevelop. And we're just going to see values here. Very little inhibition. So these storms would be surface-based. And we can see decent and okay instability access and a turning hodograph, so looping hodograph, which does suggest an isolated tornado threat would exist despite the linear storm mode. And again, you can see this develops into mostly a line of storms. Curving hodograph, decent instability would suggest damaging winds and isolated tornado threat would be possible. We're just going to try and show you how these storms evolve into getting into peak heating now, and they're going to race eastward. They'll start to weaken with the loss of instability. So now we're going to look at that instability axis that I mentioned, and it seemed to be decent instability, but not great. So let's see. We get into the mornings. This is instability around 500 to 1,000 right now, which is weak, but you can definitely get severe weather with it, and greater values. The GFS is showing values in this area of like 1,000 to 2,000, which is favorable. That's moderate instability, so that might have been a little more than what I remembered. I think I might have been confusing this with the Euro, I think. If I recall correctly, the Euro has less instability, but a moderately unstable environment. So that does show the potential for severe weather, and we're going to look at the shear aloft now, and we can see 40 to 50 knots of shear. So when you combine moderate instability with moderate shear, that's a decent environment for severe weather. Again, given the linear storm mode and not great lapse rates, which I'm going to show you right now, it suggests that mostly a damaging wind and hail threat. Again, values over 6, that can give you some damaging, that's, that's supportive of severe weather, but especially for a hail and more substantial risk. You want to see values of in these yellow and orange colors, but these lapse rates in the 6 to 6.5 and maybe isolated 6 to 7 lapse rates, that does support a severe threat, though nothing too substantial barring other factors making up for it. And while we're a couple days out, this does not give me any sort of severe weather outbreak vibes, so I don't think we're going to be seeing an outbreak of severe weather with this. Definitely some scattered damaging winds and isolated tornadoes appear possible right now. So we'll just watch and see how stuff trends. That's my feeling I'm getting with this right now. And we're going to look at the Euro. And we are going to have to go back to the 6C only goes out 90 hours. And I want to be able to show the whole event with this. And we're going to look and see how, again, so this is, these values back here, these are behind the line of storms. So you can see out ahead of the line, Euro develops a lot less instability. Let's just take a sounding here. So you can see there's a tiny bit of looping in that photograph suggesting you could maybe get an isolated tornado threat. But again, damaging winds appear to be the predominant risk with this, but isolated tornadoes do also appear possible. And we're just going to take a look at the low-level wind shear and see how that comes in. So this is a pretty decent low-level jet. This is a 850 jet or a low-level jet. This is supportive of tornadoes, especially in this area, though. Again, I think the storms aren't going to be in this environment. I think they're going to be more over here in these purple colors. We're going to check that and make sure I'm correct. Make sure I recall what I was previewing before this correctly. Yeah, and again, keep in mind, even with the stronger low-level shear up here, if we remember, there really wasn't any instability there. Again, yeah, look, there's a good turning hodograph, but 0 mixed layer cape, so you're not going to have a severe threat with that. You can see these storms, a little bit of a jump there. You can see the storms evolve eastward. It seems to maybe be slightly more messy than the GFS, but these are medium-range models. You really want to see the high-res models, which unfortunately we're still going to have to wait probably 2 more days for with this risk. That's the issue with covering stuff farther out. Just going to take a look at the moisture quick on the Euro. And we can see how despite that weak cape, that instability, despite the weak amount of cape on the Euro, there is a pretty robust moisture access. So that would favor, so we will have to keep an eye out and see if the Euro trends more towards the GFS for instability, because it's just important to watch trends with models at this range. Trends can be more important than the values at this range. And now we're going to look at our day 5 risk, which this one again does look to be another line of storms with damaging winds and an isolated tornado. Now we're going to show you why I think that now. So let's look back at the GFS. And again, so now we're in the day 5 range, so this is again really starting to get out there. But I still want to give you at least a brief look at it. You're going to see the instability axis is going to develop during the day on Wednesday. You can see it down here, and it's going to expand northward as we get later in the day. Starting to get into the afternoon now to the very robust cape axis. You can actually effectively see the line of storms right on this gradient here. Cold fronts right here, forcing up a line of storms will develop. And we're just going to take a sounding here right in front of this. And again, you can see we have not much of a turning hodograph, which is going to be a limiting factor for tornadoes with this event, and why I expect it to be more isolated. But pretty good cape down here. All of the values are over 1,000. So that favors damaging wind. So that cape can favor a lot of things, but damaging winds and hail. We need to look at the shear more to determine the tornado threat. because tornadoes are just very determined by shear. But so let's look at it, and we're going to see the bulk shear is going to come in to the afternoon hours. We can see that ahead of this is the cold front here. These values are behind the cold front, but ahead of this we have bulk shear of around 50 knots. So that's a little more than the previous days, and which a little more substantial. Nothing that favors. So bulk shear in itself, it's hard to tell what type of mode it favors. But again, we don't have good critical angles, so that makes me think of line of storms, and we'll see how the GFS does show that. So bulk shear, it's supportive of severe weather, and you could maybe get an embedded supercell within this squall line, but again, the directional shear isn't too favorable for a more substantial tornado threat, and a lot of things have to be worked out at this range. I realize that I didn't show you all the Cape as it went into the peak heating. Let's get back to Wednesday. You can see Cape axis, it's really strong down here. More moderate up here, so it's just what's looking. I didn't look the bulk shear far enough south for everyone watching, so you can see it's not as strong farther south, but that instability will likely still result in some tornado threat. And like I said, I do think there will be at least some sort of tornado threat with this. So let's look the storm relative helicity at the 0 to 3 level. We're going to see, and again, especially with this more northern mode, there's a little higher values than farther south. But again, the line of storms is going to be somewhat of a limiting factor, and the directional shear isn't too great. So that's why I think, despite these pretty favorable values, I do think tornado threat will be isolated. And this will just, we're going to take a quick look at this. This will run the amount of Cape and shear in the atmosphere and just kind of give you an okay base value parameter. Oop, whoopsie. And we can see that despite not as much Cape, we can see the values get pretty similar, and that's because the greater shear is up there. And let's just look at the storms again, how they develop. These lines of storms, it does evolve. And you can see how they do initiate farther south eventually. And yeah, see, it looks mostly linear. By linear, I mean line of storms. We're just going to see them. We're going to take a quick look at the moisture axis quickly, and then we're going to take a brief look at the day 6 risk. And this is a really long video. Again, I'm trying to cover 6 days of severe weather, so it's kind of going to be a long day. You can see this strong developing moisture axis, and then here's it a little later in the day and getting into the evening now. And I will say, I'm just looking at the GFS for now. I will say the Euro has less instability and stuff for this, though it still does develop a severe risk. Just for the sake of time, I don't want to. I'm not going to. I'll show it to you very quickly because I feel the need to show you the differences in model range at this time. But we're going to be very quick with it. We're just going to look at the instability for the sake of this. 3, 6, 9, 12. This is getting into the evening. You can see how it's much further. It doesn't develop the instability on this northern mode as much. That's the big thing. The southern mode still has the instability. Just take a really quick sounding. You can see despite the weak shear, despite the weak instability, there still might be a very isolated severe threat even on this model run because of the stronger shear. And you can see the moisture just doesn't come in quite as much on the Euro. And we're just going to take a really quick look at day 6. I might end up editing some of this out, but as of now we're at almost 36 minutes. This is a long video, and I apologize about that, and I thank you if anyone's even sticking around this long. So we're going to go back to GFS and just super quick look at day 6. Like, super quick, like, very base value, because with all these other severe risks, it just takes a long time to cover all this, and I don't even know if anyone's still going to be watching, like, this far into the video. When we get into Thursday, we can see how this Cape axis does develop. And we can just see there, and then we're going to look at the line of storms really quickly. You can see there's these storms in the area, this instability. There you go. That's a more realistic. You can see the line of storms down here. Again, up here, there's no instability, so these, I said line of storms is like areas of rain, really. Down here would be our severe risk, and we're just going to take a really quick look at the amount of shear in the upper levels of the atmosphere. We're not really going to bother to assess the tornado threat at this range. Into Thursday, you can see bulk shear 50, maybe like possibly over 50 knots, so that's a pretty good sheared environment. We're just going to take a sounding and just quickly see. But it's mostly southwesterly winds going to westerly, so there's not much directional shear, so that's probably going to be most likely another one-year event. I appreciate you if you stuck around this long into the video. This is a very long video. Yeah, I just felt the need to cover all the risks, and I will see you next time.